The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. That's what's on the table today, James. And you have a bit of a biography to contextualize where this story comes in the Dostoevsky bibliography. And so let's start there. Where in his life was Dostoevsky when he was writing this book? And feel free to go back as far as you want to lead up to this point.
All right. Um, well, I don't really know years and age. I know it's his last work, and he intended it to be a series of novels, but he died before he could um, even write the next sequel to this book. But he wrote it in light of his son, who I think was about 2 years old. His son died of some illness. I don't remember what, but and his son's name was Alyosha, which is the name of the main character in the Brothers Karamazov. And as he was grappling with the grief of losing his son, he surmised that he was going to write a book on children. As he was kind of, as I read an introduction in the Penguin's Classic publication of this book had an introduction that I gained a lot of this insight from and actually helped me to appreciate the book all the more. I'm a pretty big fan of Dostoyevsky. He's my favorite novelist. And yeah, the introduction was talking about there's letters between him and some of his friends about his desires to write a book on children. And during that same time, one theologian, a Russian theologian, came to visit him in his time of grief, and he said he was going to go to a certain monastery, and it's one that Dostoevsky himself always wanted to go to. So his wife urged him to go on the trip with him. Solovyov was the guy's name, and it's assumed that during their time together made a pretty big impression. And Solovyov later asserted that the church as a positive social ideal was to constitute the central idea of the new novel or new series of novels. And so the essayist who wrote the introduction purports that these twin themes of childhood and the church were at the forefront of Dostoevsky's mind. And as the work developed, it came increasingly to embrace nearly all the concerns and preoccupations that had stayed with the writer throughout his career, so that in its final form, the novel represents a kind of sum total of Dostoevsky's creative, philosophical, and ideological thinking. And so I think the essayist was right in claiming that. As I don't know if people even are aware of Dostoevsky's, I'm sure they probably read Crime and Punishment in high school. A lot of people had that crammed down their throats. And so they were forced to read some Dostoevsky, which it's a great work, but when you're kind of coerced into something that's really not, it's not really enjoyable if it's not your own choice. So Crime and Punishment is probably the book that a lot of people know Dostoevsky from. And what Dostoevsky really does very well, unlike anybody I've ever read, not that I've read all that many people, but is that he's able to create like three-dimensional characters, but at the same time they embody worldviews, but in such a way that it's not like straw manning them. He just has such a deep understanding of human nature, but as well as like philosophical schools of thought and how those can converge. That like when human nature and philosophy converge, it's not just like a kind of like when we were talking about the Stoics the other day. Like just because you're Stoic doesn't mean that like there's not so much nuance that your ability to appropriate and even demonstrate and act out this worldview is going to be kind of like fractal. It's like a snowflake, because of your own personal experiences, your own character, the way these things converge. It's like a whole new expression. If it's genuine, I mean, you could be just an ideologue and, you're just an echo of somebody else's worldview and way of thinking. But Dostoyevsky, in Crime and Punishment, he attempted to create a character that was a quintessential expression of nihilism. And this individual commits a crime, and and then you go through the psychological punishment that his conscience has to bear for committing that crime. So, Crime and Punishment is like a huge exposition on nihilism. The Idiot, which is one of my favorite books. I'm kind of torn between Brothers Karamazov and The Idiot, but The Idiot was his approach to try to create a Christ figure, which is like the naive child, or like an idiot, right? Like, he's so innocent that he comes across as naive and stupid, kind of like a Don Quixote. But with that character, we get Prince Mishkin as the main character of that. Rakonozkov is the main character of Crime and Punishment. And then Notes from the Underground is another expression of nihilism. I bring all this up to say that in this book, he has characters that are almost as if, like, Prince Mishkin can very much be, it's like Alyosha is like a more developed, more mature version of his attempt to create with Prince Mishkin. Ivan is like his more mature, more refined thing he tried to do with Raskolnikov, and a little bit from the character from the Notes of the Underground Man, and so on. So with that, it's like this is a huge convergence of what all of his literary career. It's like this is his magnum opus, because he just like really synthesized and also refined all of these ideas and produced a work that's unparalleled in my estimations. So that's a little bit of the background for Brothers Karamazov, my rough, exposition upon that. Yeah. What about you? Like, what interactions have you had with some of his writings?
Yeah. I have read Brothers K 2 times, and I began. I can't remember which one it is now. I think it was Demons. I began earlier this year, but I have yet to make it all the way through. It's not for lack of interest. I just have not been reading as much lately. But I think that I've also been exposed to him through other people talking about him. I'm a big Jordan Peterson fan, so then I get a lot of that from him. Peterson is enthralled with Dostoyevsky's work as well, and the parallels with Nietzsche. And so I've definitely done some cross-referencing of snippets, but I definitely don't have as full a body of Dostoevsky's work that I've imbibed myself. So I I guess I'm very dependent on the Brothers Karamazov to carry me through this conversation, because it is the magnum opus, and it does draw on themes that were prevalent through all of Dostoevsky's writing. I do know sort of high level analysis of
Damn.
most of the works. So I think that will be helpful. But yeah, I am excited to read here in the next. I'm trying to read his complete works this year. And so I'm excited to go through Crime and Punishment and go through The Idiot, and to encounter lower resolution versions of the characters that we see in the Brothers Karamazov.
No, I've never read Demons, or I think there's one called The Gambler. That's the one I have yet to read. White Nights is one that's like trending pretty hard. It's a short story. Dostoevsky also wrote a lot of short stories.
Mm-hmm.
That one was actually really fun. I enjoyed it a lot. I don't know where that falls in his career. I think he started because it took him a long time to launch as a author, but he, as an individual, um, he was caught up in some type of political movement that was. I don't really know enough about Russian history to know what was going on politically, or even what the issue was, or if it was. Anyways, what the whole entire movement was predicated upon, but he was alive during like the 1860s. I think he died like 1890-ish.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was during like around the 40s through the 60s ish. Anyways, he got caught up, went to Siberia, I think, and he was put on the firing squad line, like they're waiting on the line to get shot. He's watching his friends die, and he was, I think, just about next in line or a couple away from being in line, and they showed him mercy, and he didn't get put to death like he was anticipated dying. So it was like through that he came to Jesus, really, and that's kind of that little bit of that story is captured in Crime and Punishment, and even a little bit of. Like he puts a little bit of himself in some of these characters too, like Raskolnikov as well as Prince Mishkin. So it's really cool to kind of see that too. Like, but anyways, that's really how he came to Christ, was through that. And it wasn't too long after that I think he wrote Crime and Punishment, which I think that was the thing that really made him grow in popularity and respect. And so, anyways. This is a more like right towards the end of his life was when he wrote Brothers Karamazov, and in it he really deals with the issue of evil. I think that's a segue I kind of want to go into is this is more thoughts from. I'm going to try to find the name of the person who wrote the introduction because I might as well at this point. And he doesn't give his name. All right, it's fine.
You're not having good Google success today.
I'm really not. I don't know what it is, man. I'm really tired, actually. I just got done moving. I made a mad dash out to Fort Collins and spent a whole week saying bye to a bunch of people. And then packed. It was very emotionally draining, socially draining. And then I procrastinated until like the night before. I was going to drive back home 13 hours to pack and loaded the car literally an hour before I had to leave to go meet someone for breakfast on my way out of town. And then drove 13 hours. That was 2 days ago. So yeah. I don't know. I'm feeling very...
Only to embark upon possibly the deepest and most mentally taxing episode of Insight Incorporated that we've attempted.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I'm feeling very, very fried. But anyways, so this is the essayist's thoughts on a major theme throughout Brothers Karamazov. Says, we are enjoined to love Alyosha, who's the main character, Mitya, who's one of the brothers, and Ivan, who's another one of the brothers that we're going to actually talk more about. We're going to talk about Alyosha and Ivan in particular and an interaction they have in the book. So we are enjoined to love Alyosha, Mitya, and Ivan and the extremity of their despair and their inability to transcend their own weakness and sinfulness, and to realize that behind their helplessness, their tormented humanity, life forces that are darker and greater. And then it brings up the issue of the devil. Is the devil not Mitya or Ivan who is going to spoil some of the story, so I'm not going to read that quote. It says, we are to love these three brothers because in the sincerity of their passion, the warmth of their natures, the desperation of their souls, they have confronted the great and sinister reality from which the rest of the world is hiding. The reality which the poet Lermontov called the spirit of banishment, and which Goethe made a protagonist of his most important drama, which is Faust. And for those who have never read Faust, the main character is, well, Faust and Mephistopheles, who is the devil. And so Karamazov, that's obviously the last name, but it's also kind of becomes like a symbol of just sinful nature. The Karamazovian way. It's kind of used as a coined term throughout the whole entire book, and it deals with this huge drama going on in this family, and how the brothers kind of work through these situations. And so with that, I don't know if you have any thoughts about any of what was just said, or if I should just do the introduction on both Alyosha and Ivan.
Yeah, I think that that's an important place to go next. With what you just said, I was thinking that I might just save it for later. But I am intrigued. I'm intrigued by that part of the quote that you just read. It made me think about how the brothers seem like a type, each one a type for humanity, like an aspect. So they're each part of the fallen nature of humanity. And Ivan is the nihilist, rationalist part, and he is ultimately paralleled with the devil. And then Mitya is sort of in between, in that he falls prey to some of the same passions and like sinful lusts and desires of Ivan. But at the same time, he's innocent. In the story, I won't spoil, but in the story, he becomes accused for a crime that Ivan commits or instigates, and so Mitya is then the accused and bears the responsibility for his brother Ivan, but then lurking behind Ivan is the character of the devil. And then Alyosha is this innocent, novice, idiot character that represents the hopeful, light, positive aspects of human nature. And so I just wanted to say that because I had like an aha moment as you were laying that out, and I thought that was cool and obviously very brilliant of Dostoyevsky to build that out. And I think that helps as you read the book to sort of see the interactions between them. And we're going to study tonight and sort of dissect the culminating interaction between the nihilist and the believer in Christ, or the
holy fool,
the Christ figure. And so those are, I mean, it's like Dostoevsky puts them in a jar and shakes the jar, and whoever, survives, that's who he wants to see what happens, and the nihilist is armed to the teeth. And so there's no insufficient argument will survive this encounter. So, so it's very exciting stuff. Let's get into it.
Yeah. So this is the last quote from that introduction that I will read, but it helps to really understand the passage we're going to really spend time with. Is called the Grand Inquisitor. I'm not going to give the context of that yet. We'll get into that. But this is Dostoevsky's own, in his own writings of the character Ivan. He says that Ivan Fyodorovich is deep. This is not the contemporary atheist who demonstrates by their unbelief only the narrowness of their world outlook and the dimness of their dim-witted abilities. He goes on to claim, nihilism appeared among us because we are all nihilists. We were merely frightened by the new original form of its manifestation. Talking about like what was happening in his own day and age. Conscience without God is horror. It may lose its way to the point of utter immorality. The Inquisitor, in this example of the Grand Inquisitor that we'll read about later, the Inquisitor is only immoral because in his heart and his conscience there has managed to accommodate itself the idea of the necessity of burning humans. The Inquisitor and the chapter about children. In view of these chapters, you could take a scholarly, yet not so haughty approach to me where philosophy is concerned, though philosophy is not my specialty. Not even in Europe is there such a power of atheistic expressions, nor has there been. So it's not as a boy, then, that I believe in Jesus and confess him, but through the great crucible of doubt has my Hosanna passed, as I have him say in that same novel of mine, The Devil. And so that's Dostoyevsky's own ruminations upon this passage, that it is the most powerful atheistic expression, which I think I would definitely agree that in this section that we're going to break down, there's never been captured in any literary work such a powerful atheistic expression. But at the same time, it also makes it so there's never been such a powerful expression of faith in Christ then too, because it's juxtaposed. One is laid out in a didactic form through Ivan, and then one is demonstrated through the life of the character Alyosha. And so though Alyosha gets destroyed in terms of rhetorical engagement, he I don't think succeeds is really like he wins or anything, just that he demonstrates his worldview more clearly through his own life, which goes on to be goes on to demonstrate just the powerful views of Alyosha, though he's not able to fully articulate it in a philosophical or rhetorical way. And likewise, I think Dostoyevsky did that intentionally too. Understanding that like the gospel isn't just a philosophical expose and just another worldview. It's really something that is meant to be acted out. And it's like, actions are louder than words. And so that's why I also think it's the book as a whole, as well as really Dostoyevsky's, a lot of his writings as a whole are really powerful cases for the necessity and the superiority of the Christian worldview. But it's not put in rhetorical prowess, but really through characters that are what's the word? Well, I don't even know how to put it. Characters that are beautiful. Because they embody Christ in some way, as well as challenging the status quo in terms of even orthodoxy during his time. He was Russian Orthodox, but and I'm not too sure of the nuances that come with that and the distinctives, but he got a lot of flack for a lot of his expressions in this book, as it's unorthodox and heterodox. Really, is that what that means? Heterodox is like not orthodox. Like it's contrary to orthodoxy.
Different. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think even those, they challenge even the basic understanding of the gospel, but in a way that I think has edified me most certainly. So I don't think there's any other character in any novel I've ever been more influenced by than Alyosha, which this book kind of came into my life in it was like I think I started reading it a year after my dad died, maybe less than a year after my dad died. I remember reading a part of it. I got my wisdom teeth pulled, so I was high off Norcos, and yeah, that was fun. Anyways, I don't even know why I brought that up. It was like a time where I was really wanting, like, dude, it'd be cool to become a monk. And then like I started reading this book about Alyosha going to become a monk, but then even the leader of the monastery urged him, like, no, you need to go out into the world. Like that's the world needs you, and you need the world too. And that really inspired me. Like you see, like this character who desires to pursue Christ, but at the same time wants to love mankind, and the tradition of his time is not helping him in his love for his own family that's going through a controversy. And it is honestly like a microcosm of the whole entire world too. So even like his the father of the monastery urged him to go back into the world. And you watch the youngest of the family kind of get tossed back and forth by just these harsh realities and truly experiencing humanity, being in the trenches with the world. And so it has really inspired me a lot in many ways.
Yeah, it is. It touches on some of the deepest things in life and in profound and perceptive ways. And so, if you're willing to be inspired, I think that you will be by this book.
Yeah. That's a funny way to put that. I think that's true of anything. If you open yourself up to being inspired by, that's like a double-edged sword too, right? There's a lot of trust you have to put into a author, or even us as we make this podcast, you know? It's like,
Yes.
Any creator.
I think we covered at least a broad view of the two characters. Did you want to get into their like literary introductions in the story?
Yeah, I wrote down Alyosha has a lot more because he's the main character, but this is the way that he introduces Ivan. He kind of like, he lays out, I'm not going to get into the whole entire thing. I mean, he creates a world, he creates a family line. He creates the controversies in which these kids were born, and then how they even got divvied up because of the debaucherous nature of their father and how they had different mothers. And but eventually he introduces Ivan, who this is kind of like the first thing that he brings about. Ivan Fedorovich suddenly published in one of the main newspapers a certain strange article which drew the attention of even non-specialists, and it was particularly remarkable for concerning a subject about which, on the face of it, he might have been thought to know nothing at all. The article had been written about the question universally discussed at the time of the ecclesiastical court, and a discussion of several already received opinions on this subject. He also stated his own personal view. The principal thing was the tone of the piece and its remarkably unexpected conclusion. Many of the proponents of the church's cause really considered the author to be one of their own. And then suddenly, along with them, not only the proponents of the civic cause, but also the atheists began, for their part, to applaud. And so we see, like, Ivan is introduced as this character who he's for some reason writing about this huge controversy going on with the ecclesiastical court of the time. But he writes in a way where even the people who are part of the court think that he's with them, but even the atheists are applauding it. So he's like this very, kind of like a chameleon. So it's kind of like throughout the whole entire book, there's little instances where Alyosha and Ivan kind of meet, and you don't really know what he believes or what he stands for, because he's not really standing for anything until this passage that we're going to break down. But it's known that he's like an intellectual and maybe agnostic, but in this passage that we're going to break down breaks down the nuance of that. So that's how Ivan is introduced, that there's this buzz about him. So when he shows up to the town, especially the monastery that Alyosha's going to be a part of, there's like already buzz about him because he just wrote this big paper about some controversy happening in the church. And it's very ambiguous. And then with Alyosha, this is how he introduces Alyosha. Alyosha was in no sense a fanatic, nor even in my opinion at any rate a mystic at all. He was simply an early lover of mankind. And if he had struck out along the monastery road, it was only because it had at that time made a strong impression on him and presented itself to him as, so to speak, an ideal of deliverance for his soul, straining as it was out of the murk of worldly hatred unto the light of love. In childhood and youth he was not very expansive, nor even very talkative, but not because of suspicion, timidity, or morose aversion to human company, quite the opposite indeed, but because of something other than this, a kind of inner concern purely private and not affecting others, but so important to him that because of it he seemed to forget other people. But he liked human beings. He seemed to live all his life with a complete faith in them, and yet no one thought him a simpleton or a naive. About him, there was something that said and suggested, and was to do so for the rest of his life, that he did not want to be a judge of men, that he did not want to take upon himself the task of censor, and would not apportion it on any account. He even seemed to tolerate anything without the slightest condemnation, though often with bitter sadness. In presenting himself at the age of 20 on his father's doorstep and entering a positive den of lewdness, he, the chaste and pure one, only moved away without a word when to look was unendurable, but without the slightest air of contempt or censor in anyone's regard. And so that kind of like gives a huge insight of the character Alyosha. I kind of wanted to pause there too to hear what your thoughts were on that. Just the thought, he seemed to live all his life with a complete faith in human beings, and yet no one thought him a simpleton. About him, there was something that said and suggested, and was to do so for the rest of his life, that he did not want to be a judge of men. They did not want to take upon himself the task of censor. It would not apportion it on any account.
Yeah. What? I mean, to take an abstract view of that for the moment, I think that that Jesus Christ is presented as the ideal form of humanity, and the pure form of God, and in the sense that humanity is designed to bear the image of God or represent God, that all tracks. It makes sense that it would culminate in one person. Not that it's not miraculous and impressive that it's true and it happened, and this is the world that we live in. But I would say that Alyosha's lack of desire to be the censor of his fellow humankind is right and true, in the sense that he is pursuing an embodiment of the Spirit of God, rather than a contortion of fallen humanity into some sort of structure. And he's not trying to make people be like God. He simply is trying to be like God and invite. It's very invitational, the way that he approaches his sort of evangelism. And I think that is essential. That you cannot approach people with a standard or a judgment that they could never know how to enter into adherence to without someone providing them the example. And obviously, like, Jesus is the judge, not you. No matter how Christ-like you are or how much you embody his Spirit, you do present the judgment of Jesus, and the the contrast between the Spirit that is within you and the Spirit that's within somebody who is not Christ-like. And so the disparity there naturally presents judgment to people, but it can be free of this desire to be the censor, to be the judge of his fellow man. And so I think that in that way, Dostoyevsky does a great job capturing sort of purity in the character of Alyosha in his approach. And then I also wanted to comment that I think that Dostoyevsky, like I said before, is using Alyosha as sort of the upward aiming archetype of mankind. And not that we are an upward aiming person, but that we have an upward aiming part of ourselves. And even in Ivan's character, just separated from my little, analysis here, as an individual, he even still has an upward aiming element that conflicts you so deeply as a reader of this literature, as you are tormented by the his successful rationalization of the way that it feels and appears, and just the it's torturous, the way the arguments that he puts you through, because he basically has every bit of logic and evidence on his side of the argument that evil is an insurmountable problem, um, stemming from mankind, and then maybe even ultimately the buck stops with God. And that's a terrible weight, existential problem, burden to bear, and so when you look at Alyosha, um, as the type for the part of humanity that is aiming upward, you see the uh, the impotence of a child, that he cannot forcibly move himself forward, but that he is uh, aimed higher, and it is good and worthwhile, um, the way that he is, but he doesn't have a lot of like uh agency. I feel like he's directed throughout the story. And so for those of you who don't know, um we were talking a little bit about it, that he is a monk, and so he goes to the monastery and he seeks direction from this Father Zosima. And uh that is an interesting area of this story, where he's directed by sort of a character representing the church, just like you mentioned in the introduction, that children and the church would be central, as would be put forward as the central ideal, in Dostoevsky's next novel, which ended up being Brothers K. And uh, I think that Dostoevsky's trying to point out like some of the flaws in Russian Orthodoxy that everyone was sort of nationally experiencing, with their various interactions with the church. And so the character of Alyosha is like, we all, as a nation that Dostoevsky is sort of writing to, we all have this upward aiming sense in within ourselves, and yet we're being sort of steered wrong by a flawed system that is maybe being operated under a more nihilistic philosophy. And so, with that nihilism, the spirit of nihilism, is interrupting the way that Alyosha is able to progress forward in his own pure, upward aiming life. And yet, at the same time, his sort of like oblivious and impotent way inoculates him to the power of nihilism that has even infected the institution that he admires. And so he's like blind to the flaws and blind to the inversion of the church that has sort of caved in under this existential burden that Dostoevsky brings to the table in the form of the problem of evil. And so, uh, yeah, I just get excited thinking about how brilliant Dostoevsky is, because like most people aren't willing to admit that their systems of faith and belief and religion are corrupt in any way. There's a lot of like tribal um certainty that emerges in our systems, and then in the adherence to given systems, there's a yeah, like a just a uniform certainty that encourages blindness to certain problems, and not in the same way that Alyosha is blind and unaffected, but um, like a shutting off and a willful ignorance that we direct towards the deeper problems that Ivan presents to his brother. So yeah, Alyosha is a hopeful and inspiring characterization of the Christ figure, who is unaffected and lives purely and truly a loving life that affords humanity hope and upward aim.
Hmm. And even I think even in this quote too, Because in what you're just saying, that quote just talked about reason why he struck out along the monastery road was only because it had at that time made a strong impression on him and presented itself to him as an ideal of deliverance for his soul, straining as it was out of the murk of worldly hatred unto the light of love. And so as he's straining that, it describes him that Alyosha, he liked human beings. He seemed to live all his life with a complete faith in them.
Mm.
I think that's an interesting thing that's demonstrated. Like these characteristics are demonstrated very much so in the Grand Inquisitor. I think like that's the best place in this story where this characteristic that he brings into on page, 26, 300 pages later, he demonstrates this to a T. It's genius writing. I mean, as I read this in context, I'm like, oh, I forgot this is even how he was described. And reading the passage in this context, like made me recognize just how just genius of a capture of Christ likeness that was necessary to engage in the conversation that Ivan and him have.
Yeah.
That he does not want to be a judge of men, but he even seems to tolerate anything without the slightest condemnation, though often with bitter sadness. So it's like, though it seems like he's tolerating it, it's still hurting him, but like he still is steadfast in having faith in the person who is.
And that's extremely Christ-like, right? Like that is something that is maybe ignored in the figure of Christ as you read the Gospels through sort of your, I know these stories and you just kind of get numb to the power of them, but his true gut level love and faith in humanity to live his life in such self-sacrifice for them is, it's beyond comprehension almost. There's a Brennan Manning book called The Relentless Tenderness of Jesus, and he explores the word splengchinosomai, which is a Greek word, phenomenal Greek word. And the crux of it is a gut level compassion. And so, excuse me, he examines all the ways that word is used to communicate that Jesus's heart went out to these people, and the heart in ancient times was conceived of as your gut. But yeah, so the gut level compassion that Jesus has, I think you see that in Alyosha's sort of gut sense, if you will, that that humankind is like, you can put your faith in them, and I think it's so profound to me because we're trying to have this sequential exposition of the story so that we can, lay it out and have people come along and think the thoughts with us. But in preparation for this, we've been discussing this Grand Inquisitor scene that just pits nihilism versus faith in humanity, basically, because it's faith in God, but it's also faith in humanity. And I'm struck right now by the way that those two are inseparable. And like the communist is a nihilist, atheistic person. They have that perspective, and it leads them to seek power and authority and force in order to basically alleviate the suffering that people are enduring. And with that, it just, your nihilism doesn't start with a lack of God and end with a lack of God. It infuses your view of every single person that you're coming across, and every even yourself. I was thinking that Alyosha, you said there that he's described as having joined the monastery in hopes that he would be redeemed himself, and so like as this characterization of the upward aim of man, himself is feeling the contamination of nihilism in the culture, in that this suffering is just pointless, and the pain is too great, and what's the point? And there is no point, and that's it's actually better that there's no point, because like, how could any of this be worth it? But then Alyosha puts his faith back in humanity, by demonstrating his love for them, and in so doing, he puts his faith in God. And so it's like the nature of Alyosha is to believe in humanity, and then he believes in God. And it's so strange, because I'm sure that those are interchangeable, and you could start with a faith in God that grows your capacity as a person to have faith in humanity, but they're so integrally linked that you can't separate them. And that's just striking to me, because I think that there's uh, a fear of humanism that we have in sort of religious, spiritual spaces, that you don't want to be pro humanity, you want to be pro Jesus. And yet Jesus is the head of all human beings, and he is the pinnacle, the judge, the standard. And so to not want human flourishing to be the reality, and people, I don't mean human, but to be so reticent to move in the direction of humanism that you don't even respect human flourishing as a good thing. Um, yeah, I'm fascinated by that correlation.
Yeah, that was actually really beautiful. Wow. I think we're making good progress to introduce the topic at hand, the
conversation in the
area
pub.
of the conversation in the pub. Yes, where the brothers become acquainted. But I'm trying to think of where to even start. As you're talking about the nihilism and but still gripping for life, I think this is really touched on by Ivan in his own words. So this is the first time the brothers have actually sat down and had a one-on-one conversation. They've encountered each other on occasion, but normally in the context of in a group with the rest of the family during some kind of controversy. There's like an element where there's a time where they came before the father, Zosima, in order for him to decide upon a controversy going on. And there's another instance where he's in a room with a lover that Mitya and Ivan are both pursuing. And this is following just after that. And so this is the first time the characters actually sit down and have a discussion. And it's pretty much that. This is what Ivan says: I want to get to know you properly once and for all, for you to become properly acquainted with me. And with that, to say goodbye. In my view, the best time to get to know someone is before parting. Anyways, he says, I've seen the way you've looked at me these 3 months. Your eyes have had a sort of constant expectation in them. And that's what I can't stand. That's the reason why I've made no approach to you. But in the end, I've learned to respect you. The little man, I said to myself, knows how to stand his ground. Observe that though I'm laughing now, I speak in seriousness. I mean, you do know how to stand your ground, don't you? I like such people, whatever the ground is that they're standing on. And even if they're dear little laddies like yourself, the expectant look of yours has finally lost all repugnance for me. I think that for some reason you love me, don't you, Alyosha? And he says, yes, I do, Ivan. And then anyways, this is how Ivan says, as I sat here just now, do you know what I was saying to myself? That even if I had no faith in life, had lost my faith in the woman who was dear to me, lost my faith in the order of things, even gained the conviction that everything was, on the contrary, a disorderly, accursed, and possibly devilish chaos, even if I were overwhelmed by the horrors of human disenchantment, I should still want to go on living, and having once put my lips to that cup, will not turn away from it until I had drained it to the end. And then he says, many times I've wondered whether there exists in the world a despair of a kind that would be able to vanquish within me this frenzied and possibly indecent thirst for life. And I have decided that it apparently does not exist, before the age of 30, that is. And then I shall have had enough in any case, or so it seems to me. This thirst for life is often called base by certain consumptives, milksop moralists, especially the poets. It is somewhat Karamazovian feature, to be sure, this thirst for life in spite of everything. and it also, without question, dwells in you. But why is it base? Um, he says there's still an awful lot of centripetal force left on our planet, Alyosha. Life wants to be lived, and I live it, even though it goes against logic. Very well, so I don't believe in the order of things, but the sticky leaf bloods that open in spring are dear to me, as is the blue sky, as are certain people whom, would you believe it, sometimes what loved ones, sometimes one loves one knows not why, and as are certain human achievements in which one may perhaps have ceased to have any faith, but which for old time's sake are treasures in one's heart. So now he's like going into the nihilism. He talks about he wants to go to this trip to Europe, even though he knows it's just a cemetery of human achievements and culture, but he will still have a grand time and he will weep when he gets there, not because of despair, but simply because I shall be happy at the tears I shed. I shall grow drunk on the tenderness of my own emotion. The sticky leaf buds of spring, the blue sky, I love them. That's what. Here there is no intellect, no logic. Here is a question of loving with one's insides, one's belly, of loving one's own young energies. And Ivan asked, do you understand any of the rot I'm talking, Alyosha? Too well do I understand, Ivan. One wants to live with one's insides, one's belly. That was well said, and I'm terribly glad that you want to live that way, Alyosha exclaimed. I think that everyone has a duty to love life above all else in the world. To love life more than its meaning? Most certainly, to love it before logic, as you say, especially before logic, for only then will I understand its meaning. That is how it has seemed to me for a long time now. Half of your task is complete, Ivan, and one, you love life. Now you must apply yourself to its second half, and you will be saved. So that's the start of this conversation. And it's really like the most, I think that is the most profound contribution that Alyosha actually makes to the conversation. The rest is mostly asking for clarity, and then even times of being outraged by what's being said. But he never really claims any of his own views. I think this is the only place where he expresses his own view on life, and it's to love life more than its meaning, to love life above all else, to love life before logic, for only then will I understand its meaning. And so I think that's an interesting way to couch this argument that happens, and as to why Alyosha obviously is not able to articulate his worldview, because he's even expressed that like it's not hinged upon logic. The love for life precludes the logical understanding of the meaning of life. And in so doing, through that love, you understand the meaning of life, but not in accordance to logic. It is a type of mystical expression. But yeah, I don't know. I think that we can probably pause there for a while. It is pretty, there's a lot going on there.
Yes. Yeah, I think Ivan is almost struggling with his light side here, that despite his nihilism, he recognizes within himself a desire to go on and to continue to experience the fullness of life, even without some of the accoutrements that you would find Christians telling you that you can find in a relationship with Jesus, a trusting, loving relationship with the creator of all things. As we progress here, Ivan gets into a bit of the fact that he doesn't eliminate God as a possibility. He doesn't disregard God, but his contention is more with some of the elements of how God's world works. And so it's an interesting sort of like concession on Ivan's part to allow for the existence of God, but then question the way that he runs it. I think a lot of people that deal with the problem of evil are more willing to disregard the possibility of existence of God through the evidence that's presented to them in the form of suffering. And so so you see that internal battle of the nihilist that wakes up and takes a deep breath and walks into the warmth of the sunshine and sees the sticky leaf buds of spring, and encounters the goodness of life, the worthwhile nature of living, and even just naturally, you have an instinct to avoid dying, and so yeah, that's one of the major problems with nihilism is where does your ethical frame put an instinct to live and avoid death? Where in your nihilistic framework does that fit? And so you see, I think here the brilliant, rational nihilist struggling with that. Um, Although it's sort of like he's playing dead at the beginning of the argument, and it's sort of a trap because he
Yeah.
has thought these things through, and he has arguments against maybe the insistence that, see, life is good, you should live it, right?
Yeah, it is. It is kind of interesting how he kind of. Well, even the way. Here's the thing about Dostoyevsky is that he. I don't know what it is, but he just understands the absurd aspects of the mind. You know, there's a. Um, I don't know if you ever heard of the genre of writing that's like. What is it called? It's like stream of thought writing, like Virginia
Stream of
Woolf is
consciousness.
an example.
Yeah.
Stream of consciousness, yeah. Where it's like you really are in the mind of an individual, and how, you know, when you space out, one thought bleeds into another, but not in a very cohesive way, and it's very realistic. It takes a very active mind to be able to let it drift, but also be aware of the thoughts that you're drifting in and out of. And even though there's no tie on the surface, it's actually, there's probably a deeper level as to why these things correlate, you know, like why this memory bleeds into this memory, which bleeds into this sensation that's evoked from this thought, you know? So anyways, I like in Dostoyevsky the way that he, like Notes from the Underground, that is the greatest expose of just absurdism. And it's crazy just the way it's like literally written from like the crazy man. I mean, the main character is insane, but also at the same time very like logical. Like, I don't know if there's like some kind of thing to like psychopaths are actually very rational, very self-aware, but also the self-awareness only fuels their absurd desire to just like contradict and to still persevere, even though they know that it's absurd. It's like, this is kind of like what has happened with Ivan. Like, he recognizes that it's illogical for me to enjoy the sticky leaf buds and to enjoy the blue sky. I know it's not in accordance to my own rationale, but I still do it. And so, and even when he's talking about, and even when he's talking about wanting to go to Europe, and he knows it's just a cemetery, and I'm gonna break down and cry, but not because of like some type of despair, but just because I will be so enthralled by my own emotional vigor that I would just simply enjoy being able to to experience such an emotional experience. And so it's like, not that there's even good reason for it. I just embrace that aspect of human experience, even though it goes against logic. And so it's like the purely nihilist. Like, he's actually an intellectually honest nihilist. I love how Dostoyevsky has captured that. Like, he understood that mentality, and he doesn't strawman it. Like, it's not like, I feel like not very many people have the ability to appreciate nihilism, you know. And he actually does show a sense of appreciation, and not really condemnation. I mean, it's that exact same thing. Like, he does not want to be a judge of men. He did not want to take upon himself the task of censor, and would not portion on any account. And so even like with the nihilist, like, he gives a platform for this domineering philosophy at the time that was troubling not only Russian culture, but even in Europe more so, I think, during that time. Um, Instead of like censoring it, he gives a platform, but also demonstrates um, the flaws of it, even though he also demonstrates the intellectual prowess of it as well. So even in a way, like how Ivan's giving uh, concessions to the Christian worldview, it's almost as if Dostoyevsky's actually giving concessions to the atheistic worldview. But he does it in such a compelling way that like it's as if Ivan is not Dostoyevsky, like not a product of Dostoyevsky's mind. Like this is a real person, you know? It's just beautiful. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
it is. It is. And I think that at least to some extent that Dostoevsky himself struggled with the internal um, battleground between his like the battle that was taking place in his soul to lean towards these nihilistic arguments in the face of the suffering that he encountered, from his son dying to just the brutality of everyday life. And you see the the hopeful aspect encapsulated in Alyosha, which is sort of like profoundly attached to that same suffering, right? That the hopeful character is named after his son who died, right? That is a deep well of suffering that you never get to the bottom of this side of life, and so then this nihilism uh, is not to be disregarded as, oh, that's just meaningless, or oh, I'm being so silly. Of course, life has to mean something, or anything. Like uh, you can't just brush it off, and you can't really argue with it either. And so it's like, I think it's just honesty. I think that's what's so striking about
Hmm.
Dostoevsky, is to be honest enough to say that this has appeal. This is dark and desperate and fallen and craven, and yet it has appeal to me, right? And so the humility, to be honest, but then to even just to be honest with yourself enough to recognize that appeal is extraordinary and extremely valuable. Like we're talking about it today because we care about it. And who are we? It's not, we're not Russian.
Yeah.
I guess we're Christians, I guess, that there's an overlap there, but like we're just people, right? And we just are trying to figure out, um, should I be a nihilist or not? And I think our culture struggles with this very same thing. And so the degree to which we can be honest about the suffering that we've caused, the suffering that we've endured, and the suffering that just is the sort of milieu that we're in, it demands a response. The response can't just be, forget about it. It's not a big deal. That's not sufficient. And so, yeah, honesty is refreshing in this area.
Yeah. And so, kind of like what you said, it's like almost like a playing dead in the very beginning, because eventually he makes a movement into his argument, which is he goes on a very, very, I mean, it's one paragraph for 6 pages. Um, and each page is probably about 100 or so words, like a very, very long rant, which even that's not even the end of it, where he gives examples of children suffering. But he also says this example right before he kicks it off. He just got done talking about an unimaginable thing that the Turks did during their invasion. I don't even want to read it out loud. It's so horrible. And then Alyosha asks, "Brother, where's all this leading?" And Ivan says, "I think that if the devil doesn't exist and consequently man has created him, he has created him in his own image and likeness." And then Alyosha says, "Just in the same way he created God in that case." Ivan said, "Oh, you really do know how to turn the clever phrase, you beat me at my own game, Good, I'm glad. After all, your God must be rather fine if man created him according to his own image and likeness. You asked just now why I was saying all these things. Well, you see, one of my hobbies is the collecting of certain little facts. What I do, if you can credit it, is to note down and cull together from newspapers and reports, whatever the source, little anecdotes of a certain sort. Now I have a fine collection. Um, and so the fine collection is stories of children being gruesomely tortured and just going through intense suffering. Um, but there's this quote that I do want to get to. This is another example. The father and mother of a little 5-year-old girl, most respectable and high-ranking people, educated and of progressive views, conceived a hatred for her. Let me tell you, I once again positively assert that in many scions of mankind there is a curious property, the love of torturing children, but only children. To all other specimens of the human race, these same tortures are even favorably and meekly inclined, as befitting humane men of European and progressive education, but they have a great love of torturing children, and their love for children is even based on that. It is the very unprotected aspect of these creatures that tempts the torturers, the angelic trustfulness of the child, which has nowhere to go and no one to turn to. This it is that excites the foul blood of the torturer. And this is the quote right here. In every human being, of course, there lurks a beast of anger, a beast of voluptuous excitement derived from the cries of the tortured victim, a beast uncontrollable, unleashed from the chain, a beast of ailments contracted in debauchery, gout, and the like. These progressively educated parents subjected that poor 5-year-old girl to every torture one could think of. They beat her, flogged her, kicked her, themselves not knowing why, turned her whole body into a mass of bruises. At last they attained the highest degree of refinement. In the cold and freezing weather, they locked her up for a whole night in the outside latrine because she did not ask to be relieved, as though a 5-year-old child sleeping its sound, angelic sleep could learn to ask to be relieved at such an age. What is more, they smeared her eyes, cheeks, and mouth all over with feces and compelled her to eat those feces. And it was the mother who did the compelling. And that mother was able to sleep, hearing at night the moans of the poor little child locked up in the foul latrine. So now do you understand when a small creature that is not yet able to make sense of what is happening to it beats its hysterical breast in a foul latrine in the dark and cold with its tiny fists and wails with its bloody, meek, rancorless tears to dear Father God to protect it? Now do you understand all that rot, my friend and my brother, my godly and humble lay brother? Do you understand why all that rot is so necessary? Without it, they say, man would not be able to survive upon earth, for he would not know good from evil. Why recognize a devilish good and evil when it costs so much? I mean, the entire universe of knowledge is not worth the tears of that little child addressed to dear Father God. I say nothing of the sufferings of grown-ups. They have eaten the apple and the devil with them, and the devil take them all. But the children. I'm tormenting you, Alyosha, my lad. You look as though you were beside yourself. I shall stop if you wish. And so he goes into another scene after that too. But I wanted to pause on that even Ivan is recognizing in every human being there lurks a beast. And that like even his expression, like he recognizes the fallenness of humanity and even in himself, in every single one of us. Like if it's left unchecked, it can flare up in voluptuous excitement derived from the cries of the tortured victims. I think even like if there's people listening right now, like this is completely. I mean, this is darkness of a side that we're not often willing to really talk about or even address, or we even hear about really. But to hear about this, a beast of voluptuous excitement derived from the cries of tortured victim, a beast uncontrollable, unleashed from the chain. It's like, unless you really read about even what were to happen in Russian history, like only 40 years later, it's like Dostoyevsky saw in a way like what this was leading to, even with, not even with Russia, but even with like fascism and nationalism, and how in the name of whatever it is, man could justify unleashing this aspect of himself that is so capable of horrible things like what we just read, to torture. It's heavy. And that's like not even a
Yeah,
little small sliver of the worst examples that is given in this passage.
I know.
But
Some of
that
them
that
are terrible with the infants and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But that quote though, in every human being there lurks a beast. I kind of want to pause on that. Um,
Yeah. No, I think that uh I think that this is the sense that I have that nihilism emerges from a sense of helplessness that is found when you confront this reality. And so it can be this true form of nihilism that we've said that Dostoevsky is so perceptive in being able to bring to uh, existence in his writing, um, in the character of Ivan. But then what you see is a lack of faith in humanity to triumph and to be good rather than beastly and evil, and with good reason. Right, that's the terror of Ivan, is that he has every answer and he has the evidence to back up his claims that you should not put your faith in mankind, and you should uh per- perhaps you should coerce people into a more a tamer expression of their fallen nature, and that nothing could justify what it is that we're capable of. And so there's two things here. That the one is we don't want to admit that we're capable of these things, and it's just so tragic, deeply tragic, what it is that mankind has done to their brothers themselves.
mhm.
And so to admit that this battle is taking place within you is to take responsibility for the torment and the suffering and the the tragedy. And so yeah, I think but I think it's a necessary part of placing your faith in humanity. Is sort of like, it's interesting because the character of Alyosha and his innocence and idiocy are supposed to be representative of the holy fool of Jesus Christ, and uh, this naivete that lends itself to hope and faith in God and in humanity, that God is working to restore and reconcile and redeem. And yet, every day we are confronted by our base nature. And so I think everybody has a lurking sense. If they're not aware of it, it's because they've constructed their life in such a way to, you know, make them oblivious to the way that their nature would allow themselves to partake in this, you know, what did you call it? The voluptuous uh, enjoyment of these tortures, and and yet, like, if you if you read history, you can read it as the hero, and that is the most common way to read it, and identify
Mhm.
with the moral hero of every encounter, or you can read it as the perpetrator of the atrocity. And if you read it that way, you're confronted by the possibility of your own enjoyment of these types of things. And
Yeah.
it's so humiliating to admit that there's a part of you that would partake in this. I think of this almost every time someone said they hear a juicy bit of gossip about how somebody did something so wrong in their life, and the sentence is familiar to all of us. How could they do that? I think that's so stupid to say. How could they do that? It's such a, it's brushing it off. Like, oh my gosh, this other type of person that I am not like in any way, they committed some horrible mistake, or worse, some intentional act of evil and wrongdoing. Thank God I'm not like that. I'm so
Mm.
pleased with myself to be nothing like that person. I think that's so idiotic to approach suffering and evil and wrongdoing in that way, because for one, it's a slippery slope. It is a false sense of security that you are not like them. It's a lie that you're not like them. And so then, yeah, I mean, what a heavy lift it is to encounter those stories and take onto yourself the capacity for whatever it is that you just heard. And I know there's
Hmm.
deep and dark places in human nature and what it is that we're capable of. But a necessary step in the direction of faith in humanity is recognizing how you have that capacity yourself, you know? And I think that this is an interesting tie to where Ivan has, dragged Alyosha in this, argument jujitsu. We're in the territory of children, innocence, undeserving suffering. They've not brought this on themselves. At 5 years old, this little girl, she didn't bring this on herself. She didn't even ask to exist, right? And yet she suffers the consequences of living in a world that's populated by people who are capable of this and give in to these temptations. And it's horrific. It's gut wrenching. I think
Hmm.
especially I think especially now, reading this as a father of a 5-month-old son, I encountered these tragic stories with such a deeper compassion. Like, you can turn your head and like look away from the page and kind of blink it away, like, wow, that's awful. But to know the love that I have for my son, and to imagine uh, being the one to do these evil things to him, or even just that anyone could or would, is uh, terrifying. It is not inspiring of faith in my fellow man. And yet,
Mm.
the impossibility of justification for the redemption of a type of people that are all like this. We are, as a human race, we're all like this. We at least have the capacity. The depth of evil and darkness that can overtake us is like mirrored by the height of good and lightness that can permeate our being, and that can uh conquer the darkness. And even as I say it, it's like it's trite because it's in the face
Mm.
of these ironclad arguments. But do you see what I'm saying with this like assumption of responsibility for all of mankind's uh, evil?
Mm. Yeah, it makes me think of that parable that Jesus gives of the Pharisee and the publican when they go to the temple to pray. And the Pharisee, he prays to God. He says, "Thank God that I'm not like this man over here. I'm
Yeah.
not like this snake. Like, because this is a politician. Like, I'm not like this gross politician. I pay my tithes. I I spend my time here in the temple." And then Jesus then describes the prayer of the publican and says that he doesn't even look up to God. He lays his head down, beating his breast, saying, "Lord, have mercy on me, the sinner."
Mm,
And he says that man went home justified,
mm.
and not like a sinner. He's the sinner. I think it's exactly what we're talking about, like the one who's willing to recognize and identify themselves with, yeah, that the sinner. It's only when you can actually, as it's being portrayed here, it's like it's not like this. Yeah, I think people just don't really study history um, for that reason too. It's just like, or maybe they study parts of history where it's like exactly like from the hero's perspective, especially authors who love to write, and we're descendants of that hero, so therefore we have a part of that hero too. Like Benjamin Franklin did this great thing, uh, Paul Revere. We're little mini Paul Reveres now. We're sons of Paul Revere, and it's like, uh, you know, that's like a surface level. There's so many little tiny stories. If you were to break into detail, like, yeah, just the depths of
Yeah.
depravity that occurred even during the revolution, for example, or something, like, we
Yeah.
like to gloss up these things, but not recognize that like we are all the sinner. Um, and just the many ways that you can justify yourself. That's what the Pharisee's doing. He justifies himself by saying, I pay my tithes, I do this thing. I'm not, I've done the thing where I can look you in the face shamelessly, God. I'm looking up to you, and I'm looking in because I know that I am upright. But it's because you're trying to justify yourself. You don't recognize even that in itself is worse than even an Ivan character, like, um, because exactly what the writer in the introduction wrote, like these are individuals who are wrestling with the aspects of humanity that we don't like to acknowledge. How did it put it? Um, we are to love these three brothers because in the sincerity of their passion, the warmth of their natures, the desperation of their souls, they have confronted the great and sinister reality from which the rest of the world is hiding. Um, yeah, and there's a reality that we want to hide from.
Mm.
But the one
That's
who
represented
actually,
in the story by their father, and so it's their history. It's the darkness of the place that they come from. The mountain of evidence that supports the suffering that you experience in life, that comes from a historical representation of humanity.
yeah, I think it's even when he says like it's a Karamazovian baseness, this like acknowledgement of the facts, but then the ability to just like on the basis of my own absurdity to just still just go about my way of doing things. But then even the acknowledgement of that and being able to coin it like this is how our family has operated is even
Mm.
grappling with it. It's not just like an autopilot anymore. There's actually like a metacognition involved and recognizing that it is baseness, calling a spade, but still recognizing that he can't deliver himself from it. Um, even in all the logic and all the philosophizing, he couldn't deliver himself from that baseness that has plagued his family. And he even says, it's even in you, isn't it? He doesn't even like know Alyosha, but Alyosha recognizes, yeah, it's even in me too. Um, and so they're like two sides of a coin where they both recognize they're the sinner. Um, and it's really, that's why I think this argument is so compelling that Ivan is in no way trying to justify himself. I was going to move on to the kind of like how he closes this segment, and this segment leads into the Grand Inquisitor that we will spend more time with. Um, am I going to move on, or do you have more thoughts?
No, you can move on.
Okay. So after going through another instance of a child who is the son of a servant, who and his child like um, meanness, he throws a rock at a dog, and the dog gets hurt. It's the master's dog, and so in retaliation, this 8-year-old is locked up for the whole night, and then the master gets all of his hunting buddies together, and they release the kid, tell him to run, and they let the dogs out on him. They hunt him like he's like a wild animal, like game in front of his mom. And then as the kid is getting ripped to shreds by the dog, he's crying out to Father God. Um, and then Alyosha says, why are you putting me to the test like this? Will you please finally tell me? It's like, why are you going through all these terrible stories? He says, of course, I'll tell you what it is I've been leading up to. Listen to me, I took the exclusive instance of young children in order to make it more obvious. Of the other human tears in which the earth is steeped from crust to core, I have not said a word. I have purposely kept my subject narrow. I am a bedbug, and I confess with all due self-disparagement that I am quite unable to understand why everything is ordered thus. So it must be the fault of people themselves. Given paradise, they wanted freedom and stole fire from heaven, knowing that while they would be unhappy, and so there is no reason to feel sorry for them. Oh, with my pathetic earthly Euclidean mind, I only know that there is suffering, that none does offend. That's a quote from some poem. That one thing proceeds from another, quite plainly and simply, that everything flows and evens out. For after all, that is merely Euclidean rubbish, and after all, I know it, but I cannot agree to live by it. He says, I want retribution, otherwise I shall destroy myself, and retribution not at some place and some time in infinity, but here upon earth and in such a way that I see it for myself. I have believed in it, and I want to see it for myself. And if by that time I am already dead, then let me be raised up again. For if it all takes place when I'm not here, it would be too hurtful. For I did not suffer in order with my villainous actions and my sufferings to manure a future harmony for someone else. And he says he wants to see the one who is slaughtered embrace the one who has killed him. He wants to see the lion lay down with the lamb. And all the religions of the earth have been founded on that desire, and I believe. But here, however, are the children, and what am I to do with them? That is the question I am unable to resolve. For the 100th time I repeat, there are a great number of questions, but I have taken the sole instance of young children, for here it is irrefutably evident what I must say. Look, if everyone must suffer in order with their sufferings to purchase eternal harmony, what do young children have to do with it? He goes on to say how it's impossible to understand why they should have to suffer. And so he says, like, with that retribution and all that, he can understand that for like adults, for grown-ups to go through that retribution and go through, even if it means going to hell, if it means this, if it means that. But when it comes to children, he's saying that their tears are much too precious to ever be able to be redeemed in that manner, the same manner as grown-up fallenness. And to say that they partake in the sin of their fathers, that's even a mystery he cannot understand. And so with all this saying, he says, some wags will perhaps say that, like it or not, the child will grow up and in times commit sins. But here is one who has not grown up, and yet at 8 years old was hunted down by dogs. O Alyosha, I do not blaspheme. I understand what a shaking must rend the universe when all that is in heaven and on the earth flows together in one laudatory voice. And all that liveth and hath lived exclaims, just and true art thou, O Lord, for thy ways are made plain. And when the mother embraces the torturer who tore his son to pieces with his dogs, and all three of them proclaim in tears, just and true art thou, O Lord, then of course the day of knowledge will have dawned, and all will be explained. The only trouble is that it's precisely that I cannot accept. And for as long as I am on the earth, I shall hasten to make arrangements of my own. You see, Alyosha, it may very well be, perhaps, that when I reach the moment in my life at which I see it, or rise up from the dead, in order to do so, I myself may exclaim with all the rest, as I watch the mother embracing the torture of a little child, just and true art thou. But it is something I do not want to do. While there is still time, I shall hasten to guard myself, and so I decline the offer of eternal harmony altogether. It is not worth one single small tear of even one tortured little child that beat its breast with its little fist and prayed in its foul-smelling dog-hole, with its unredeemed tears addressed to dear Father God. It is not worth it because his tears have remained unredeemed. They must be redeemed, or there could be no harmony. But by what means will you redeem them? Is it even possible? Will you really do it by avenging them? What use is vengeance to me? What use to me is hell for torturers? What can hell put right again when those children have been tortured to death? And what harmony can there be where there is hell? I want to forgive and I want to embrace. I don't want anyone to suffer anymore. And if the sufferings of children have gone to replenish the sum of sufferings that was needed in order to purchase the truth, then I declare in advance that no truth, not even the whole truth, is worth such a price. And above all, I do not want the mother to embrace the torturer who tore her son to pieces with his dogs. Let her not dare forgive him. If she wants, she may forgive him on her own account. She may forgive the torturer her limitless maternal suffering. But as for the sufferings of her dismembered child, though she has no right to forgive, she dare not forgive his torturer, even if her child himself forgave him. And if that is the case, if they dare not forgive, where is the harmony? Is there in all the world a being that could forgive and have the right to forgive? I do not want harmony. Out of a love for mankind, I do not want it. I want rather to be left with sufferings that are unavenged. Let me rather remain with my unavenged suffering and unassuaged indignation, even though I am not right.
Hmm.
And that's kind of like the major crux right there is like, out of love for mankind, I do not want harmony. And I also, I want to be left with sufferings unavenged. He wants to have the unavenged suffering and the unassuaged indignation. Because what he imagines as that the great day of the Lord, where the day of knowledge, where all is put right, all is made clear as to why it's happened this way, and we all proclaim, just and true art thou. He can't imagine that being worthy enough of the tear of the suffering child. And so it's like this love for mankind, his idea of love for mankind prohibits him from embracing this harmony that is purported to come. That's like the status quo of the church, this harmony. And he says, and in any case, harmony has been overestimated in value. We really don't have the money to pay so much to get in. And so I hasten to return my ticket. And if I am at all an honest man, I am obliged to return it as soon as possible. That is what I am doing. It isn't God I don't accept, Alyosha. It's just his ticket that I most respectfully return to him. And Alyosha says, that is mutiny. He says, mutiny? I don't like to hear you say such a word, Ivan said with emotion. One can't live in a state of mutiny. But I want to live. And he says, he gives this example about how if harmony were to be purchased by the blood of an innocent child, would he accept it? And Alyosha says, no, I would not. And then Alyosha says, just now you said, is there in all the world a being that could forgive and have the right to forgive? Well, that being does exist, and it can forgive everything, everyone, man and woman alike, and for everything, because it gave its innocent blood for all things and all men. You're forgotten about it, but on it the edifice is founded, and this is it, that people will exclaim to it, just and true art thou, O Lord, for thy ways are made plain. And Ivan says, you mean the only sinless one in his blood? No, I haven't forgotten about him, and have on the contrary been amazed at how long it has taken you to introduce Jesus into the argument. For your kind usually will him out right at the start. And then he says, I've composed a poema, a little poem called The Grand Inquisitor. And so that's when he segues into the passage that we're going to spend more time on too, but I wanted to pause on that. I think that lays out Ivan's argument and concludes it very much more so than the Grand Inquisitor could if you take it out of context. Like, you need that context to really appreciate the Grand Inquisitor, I think, because now he's going to finally address Jesus.
Yeah, and like Alyosha, in a naive way, I think that, and not to dismiss the way that we put our faith in Jesus, but I think that you and I are like longing to reach the point in this conversation where we begin to rely on our presumptions about the way that the world works and the way that Jesus steps in and ameliorates this suffering. And it's like, being underwater and holding your breath, and you want to just get up to the surface to take that breath. That is how I feel, at least, talking about this level of suffering that is so deep and true. And I am trying to find a way to introduce it that doesn't undermine or dismiss Ivan's arguments, because we've only presented a selection of them because of how debaucherous and evil and horrible that they are.
Unimaginable.
Seriously. And yet I think the one that you used, not that it was like easy to sit through, I think that one does capture what you encounter reading Brothers Karamazov. And And so, yeah, as we move forward into the hope of redemption that we believe that we can find in uh, Jesus, I think that it's important to couch it in the miraculous. That word's going to be coming into question here, but the equally unimaginable hope that comes in the face of this unimaginable despair. And yeah, I'm just fascinated by the nihilist that Ivan is, and his ability to see through the trite surface level solution to suffering that is offered uh, in the way of distraction, almost. Like, just put your hope in the next life. Just know that it's all going to be okay. And even if those things are true, he's like, how and why. And I think it's important to be that honest in your approach to suffering. And I'm not just speaking to believers in Jesus, but also to people who don't believe, that are confronted by these thoughts themselves, that there's nothing that says that you can't think at this level of rigor when opposing what seems to be too good to be true. Uh, I wonder. I guess I'll just put it on you because I can't quite. I can't quite say it without moving forward into the next chapter. But I'm just trying to think of, like, uh, do you have anything else to tack onto this section um, of the battle between Alyosha's faith in humanity and Ivan's conclusive doubt in humanity?
Well, I think now to reintroduce what Dostoyevsky said about this passage. Not even in Europe is there such a power of atheistic expressions, and we're not even done. That's that's the
Yeah.
crazy thing. Uh, so it's not as a boy then that I believe in Christ and confess Him, but through the great crucible of doubt has my Hosanna passed. And I think that's the thing too. Is like, um, and I think as I'm thinking about this too, like introducing these thoughts to maybe even someone who's young in the faith or someone who is very susceptible of being reasoned out of the faith. It's probably because they were reasoned into the faith.
Mm.
And that's my criticism towards apologetics, and they have their place. But if that's the basis on which you believe is because of logical, uh, rhetorical exposés on the reasons to believe in Jesus, as soon as you encounter an Ivan, as many, maybe more profound than Ivan in real world, um, even as Alyosha's crying out, like, why are you putting me to the test like this? Like, um, I think that's the thing too. The fact that Alyosha even sits through the whole entire thing without even interrupting, without censoring him. I think there's many um, who are scared of doubt. That's why we hide from these topics, and we also gloss over them very easily with pithy, Isaiah 42:3, like one verse at a time, reference book on how to counteract this doubt. Which, not that there's anything. I hope people. I'm very much trying to be aware of audiences. It's like the one hand who has wrestled through doubt, but at the same time, still have yet to actually encounter the world. I think this is why the beautiful thing about the Brothers Karamazov is that, like, um, with the theme being the church being the central as a beacon for society, Dostoyevsky does it without pulling punches at the same time. Whereas, like, uh, Alyosha needs this in order to. That's why Father Zosima, the elder, tells him to go back into the world, and it's to encounter things like this. Because if not, then you don't actually know how to love mankind if you're not willing to know. And the fact that he's willing to actually sit down and get to know Ivan, and isn't trying to convert, but is actually trying to love this individual. That is shown through this interaction. So with that being said, it's like, yeah, I like that when they introduce Alyosha, it's like he's not just there's no sense of fanatic or at any rate a mystic. He wasn't like just an ideologue. He was actually an individual who understands the nuances and the fallenness and is looking for salvation through an institution whom even the figure who is to represent the institution tells him there's even corruption here. You're not going to find shelter from it in here. In fact, it could be even worse because we don't know how to actually love the world because we've sheltered ourselves from it. So it's like you need to go out there because the thing you're trying to run from is still here too. It's just disguised in another way. In order to properly appreciate this, you need to actually call a spade a spade. So, anyways, my initial thing was to demonstrate that, like, in order to even give a good context to the Grand Inquisitor, it's very interesting that I think Dostoyevsky captures an aspect of the gospel that I think is often overlooked, but at the same time, it's not like it's gospel the way he's expressing it. I think there's still, I don't agree with every single aspect as if this is doctrinal, but at the same time, he captures elements of the gospel that are necessary. But at the same time, he does that in order to show how, and this, he gives the Roman church, shows how they are corrupt to a degree that they are trying to undermine what Ivan's conception of Jesus' major purpose in his ministry was to grant mankind freedom, even if that means it costs him happiness, and that the church then rights that wrong by causing the people to use their freedom to give it back to the church so that in exchange they can have happiness and peace of conscience, even though Jesus came to even burden the conscience even more. Like you've heard it said, do not look upon a woman with lust, but I say to you, if you even, or do not commit adultery, but if I say to you, if you look upon a woman with lust, you've committed adultery in your heart. Like, kind of the critique that Ivan puts in the mouth of the Grand Inquisitor is true. Jesus didn't. If his claim was to bring about happiness in utopia, the way that he went about it was as if he had no pity upon mankind at all. But actually, that's not what Jesus' purpose was. It wasn't to bring happiness. It was to bring freedom. And in so doing, it's like things have to get worse before they get better. Like you have to understand the bad news before you can really understand how good the good news is. I think Dostoyevsky does a really good job of doing that, even through an individual like Ivan, who is wrestling with doubts, and Alyosha is wrestling with doubts, and has now introduced new doubts. But yet is honest. I think that's really what it comes down to. I think a lot of our conversations about these issues and even philosophizing about these issues, especially in Christian circles, is like we're not very honest with ourselves. That, and this is why you and I have this passage that we wrestle about is 1 Corinthians 1, 2, and 3. But I think this is the point that Paul is trying to make, is that, like, says, I did not come in cleverness of speech, so the cross of Christ would be made void. For the word of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved is the power of God. And so this whole thing about him not wanting to not come with superiority of speech or of wisdom, proclaiming to you the testimony of God, for I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. My message and my preaching were not in persuasive words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith would not rest on the wisdom of men, but on the power of God. And this is a major element of even how Paul is talking about when he first came. So this is also in the context when he first came, and when the Corinthians first heard the gospel message, he says, I did not come to philosophize with you, which is interesting because he went to Corinth right after the Mars Hill encounter too. That was the next stop, was Corinth. So I don't know. It's theorized that that's why he took that approach, because he just got done talking with the Stoics, and he's like, he just knew his audience, I think. And so he said, I came with demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so your faith would not rest on the wisdom of men, but on the power of God. And I think a lot of the times in our culture, we're so much of the lecture-based. We kind of talked about this in our last episode about the hermeneutics. It's like we're very much a culture of scholasticism and very much love lectures. And I think there's many who are converted due to persuasive words of wisdom, and not because they actually have someone who's in their life who's demonstrating the Spirit and the power of God. But this is, I think, what Alyosha does in this encounter, that like as Ivan is using persuasive words and using you cannot beat the world at their own game. That's why he says, where's the wise man? Where's the scribe? Where's the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? Like, it's still wisdom. It's still not like the true wisdom like we talked about with the Stoicism thing, but it's like, for since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not come to know God, God was well pleased through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. There's this element of like, on the face level, it's like you're never going to out debate the debater of the age. You're never going to out philosophize the scribe. And that's not even what Jesus did. He came and he demonstrated power. And so, but then Paul says, yet we do speak wisdom among those who are mature. Wisdom, however, not of this age, nor of the rulers of this age who are passing away. But we speak God's wisdom in a mystery, the hidden wisdom which God predestined before the ages to our glory. The wisdom which none of the rulers of this age has understood, for if they had understood it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But just as it is written, things which eye has not seen and ear has not heard, and which have not entered the heart of man, all that God has prepared for those who love him. And so even that verse right there, I wanted to bring to the table about even Ivan's conception of the harmony that is to come because of what Jesus institutes that day, that just and true art thou, O Lord, that day. The way that even that is introduced to the conversation, I think, is very trite, very we don't I think it's due to a lack of recognition that there is still mystery, which is also going to be talked about in this Grand Inquisitor thing, but there is still mystery about this hope. And it's a thing that eye has not seen, ear has not heard, has not entered the heart of man, all that God has prepared for those who love him. Like, so any type of trying to pose the age to come in a way that actually answers that issue satisfactorily, you can't, because it's not according, like, my ways are higher than your ways, God says. And so it's like he's left us helpless. You know, the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for tearing down strongholds and every imagination that exalts itself above God. That's not to do with like logic or rationale solely. It's really just a trust in the authority of God, which is what we see with Jesus in the temptations, you know? And like, it wasn't like an outwitting necessarily. It's just it's a childlike trusting in the Father.
Yeah.
It's not based upon logic. It's just based upon I've seen the demonstration of his power and his love and I trust it. And the more I trust it, the more I see. Like the more I press into it, the more I see too. It's like, and that is what my Hosanna is predicated upon. It's not predicated upon logic or any of that. And that's why I think Alyosha, even when he starts his thing, the conversation, when he says, bear with me for a moment. Too well do I understand, Ivan. One wants to live with one's insides, one's belly. That was well said, and I'm terribly glad that you want to live that way. I think that everyone has a duty to love life above all else in the world. Ivan asks, to love life more than its meaning? Most certainly, to love it before logic, especially before logic, for only then will I understand its meaning. That is how it has seemed to me for a long time now. And so, it's like choosing to love before you actually have a good reason to, almost. I think that's the whole faith in humanity thing, to get back to it. But all this to say, this next passage, I think, addresses head on the shallowness, but even it goes on to the effect that when it says, for we do speak wisdom among those who are mature, wisdom, however, not of this age, nor of its rulers of this age who are passing away. Even that passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 6, I think addresses this passage very clearly, because Ivan's going to do with the authority that the church, the Roman Catholic Church, has, and how they have become a ruler of this age. And they know it full well. Like they caved to the temptation of the devil when he says, bow down before me, I'll make you a ruler of all nations. The Grand Inquisitor claims that, like, we did that. We recognize that the devil was right in what he was posing you, and that was the only way to make man happy. And even if it means that he's going to be damned, at least he's happy. Because the burden that you place on mankind, the freedom that you bolstered and even made more burdensome, and even like the conscience that's more pricked by your words, you set them free, but they don't want freedom. They want to worship something that they can fully comprehend and fully and unequivocally cause all to bow down to. And that's not you. And so we became that, which is so crazy. Like, this church institution became that in your name too. And so, yeah, I wanted to try to introduce these things before we start actually going into it, because I think this is why this is such a powerful passage. And it compels us to reconsider, where does my hope lie?
Yeah. I have two passages I want to correlate quickly, and then we'll wrap this up as the first part of two parts, and the second will be fully devoted to for probably about half the time, but a full scope look at the Grand Inquisitor. So the first passage is in Isaiah 45. And it's God speaking, and he says, I create the light and make the darkness. I send good times and bad times. I, the Lord, am the one who does these things. Open up, O heavens, and pour out your righteousness. Let the earth open wide so salvation and righteousness can sprout up together. I, the Lord, created them. And I want to read more of that, but I'm saving it for the next episode, sort of for the sake of time. But it just goes on into the clay pot. What does the clay pot have to say to its creator? Why did you make me this way? Why did you make me at all? And how it just doesn't work that way. And it's pretty blunt in this Isaiah passage. He says, I'm the one who does this. I do these things. God takes responsibility for the creation of the light and the creation of the darkness. And it made me think of the part about the rain, made me think about Jesus teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. and it's towards the end of the first section, chapter 5, where Jesus is giving these instructions. You've heard it said, but I say unto you, and he's deepening it, like you referred to the adultery and then the lust after a woman and or a man. And Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 says, "You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends his rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." And there's a lot there, but obviously it correlates with that righteousness, which can be translated as justice. And so that's like exactly what Ivan is getting at. He's saying there's so much unjust suffering in the world. And he uses the pinnacle of all arguments against it, the suffering of innocent children, to communicate his point. What could possibly justify this? And we read that part, you read it, about, if even just the suffering of one tiny creature, he said, take the boy who suffered the being eaten by the dogs. If even just that one creature suffered in order that we would know what it's like to be apart from God and move in the direction of God, would it be worth it? And Alyosha, who has faith in humanity, has faith in God, says, no, it would not be I cannot consent to that. It would not be worth it. And so this is the power of Ivan's rational argument against suffering as a means of moving us towards lack of suffering or justice. But I think that I see in this passage, this teaching from Jesus about loving your enemies, maybe what we'll expound on in this next episode, that this is all unjust and it needs to be justified. And it would be completely unjust if we were finding the justification within humanity. But in that, the Creator, God, who makes these things happen, the light and the darkness, and point of clarity, he is not causing directly the suffering of mankind, but Ivan is noticing this integral relationship between the Creator, the one who starts the ball rolling, and the eventual consequences of his creation. There is only one way to justify it, and it is in the Creator suffering the consequences on the behalf of the created. And so we find that in Jesus. The innocent blood is shed, and it is human and divine. He suffers the consequences of humanity that humanity has brought upon themselves. But in that, he was the progenitor, the creator of humanity, the Father. He takes on the responsibility and leaves us the example and the power of his Spirit to do the same, to take onto ourselves responsibility, like we were talking about, for the depth of depravity that we are capable of. But then at the same time, the hope of redemption and justification that can come through such sacrifices. And so anyway, I was extremely compelled by recognizing that as you were talking about Paul and him speaking about the cross. He's not speaking about it in some surface level trite way that is incapable of affecting the mother of that boy that was eaten by the dogs, or changing the hearts of the parents that beat their 5-year-old daughter, or the countless other sins that you can think of listening to this. But rather, you find the character of God is such that he willingly adopts our self-inflicted suffering and pays the consequences to invite everyone into a life that is humble and appropriately adopts responsibility for our actions, such that we can love our enemies and those who persecute us and harm us. And you see Jesus in the suffering children, right? They're
Mm.
the exact point that Ivan is making is the only point of redemption, that these needless and wanton acts of violence against children are completely unjustified, unnecessary, and uh, extemporaneous, and yet it is in that exact moment that you see the price of living life without sacrifice to God and to other people, without faith in God and in other people, and even in yourself, you know. And so, yeah, and so that be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect is not simply a command, but it is a demonstration. Jesus on the cross is the demonstration of that word is teleos. So it's fruition, like bloom. Be the be the tree that you were meant to be, bear the fruit that you were meant to bear by doing this, by loving the people that do not deserve your love, and by letting your rain fall unjustly on the unjust, in that you invert and negate and counteract all that is wrong with humanity and reveal all that can be right and will be redeemed.
Mm. Yeah, I once read a sermon that was talking about how Jesus had faith in, like Peter, for example, or Jesus had faith in um, just individuals. Like, I forgot the sermon illustrations they use from Scripture, but just the way that he talked of people, like even Peter, like calling him, you are rock. You were Simon, but now you are Peter, rock, Cephas. Um, and just that is expression in faith in this individual who will be changed in the faith of Jesus. And so I think even Dostoyevsky attempting to make a Christ figure and saying that he liked human beings, he seemed to live all his life with a complete faith in them. Um, yeah, he was not simpleton. Like, he did this full recognizing even humanity, but even in that, it's like the hope against hope. And Jesus demonstrates that most certainly when he calls any of us, and even in what he's saying on the Sermon on the Mount, like to the exact thing we're going to talk about more in the next chapter about how what the Grand Inquisitor charges Jesus of being incompassionate for placing such a burden like of responsibility. It's actually an expression of his faith in humanity who trusts him. Like, so like, yeah, I do want to put that even to redeem to some minds to hear this whole talk of faith in humanity, help constituting faith in Jesus. And some may think that's some type of heterodoxy in and of itself as well, but Jesus demonstrates that faith in everyone whom he calls. Like, faith is the evidence of things hoped for, the conviction of things unseen. And so in that moment, in calling Peter, it was not like he saw something that made him logically, it was empirical fact that That's the logical conclusion he came to about Peter based upon how he conducted himself. That, oh yeah, you're a rock, Peter. I see this, and that's just the
Mhm.
conclusion I've come to. And it's funny that it's actually kind of said after he just asked Peter, "Who do people say that I am? Who do you say that I am? You are the Christ." And so it's even like, I think that's even maybe even a parallel there too. Like Peter having faith in Jesus is similar too. It's not like that was a logical conclusion that he is the Christ. That took faith, and then Jesus reciprocates that faith even in Peter in some way too. I think. I don't know. I've never
Mhm.
thought of it like that, but yeah. So faith is the evidence of things hoped for, conviction of things not seen. It says that in Hebrews chapter 11. Um, and so even with faith in humanity, I'm going to treat you as though you are the person that Jesus like calls us to be, and that is the hope that we have in of ourselves. We hope to be uh, glorious as he is glorious, perfect as he is perfect. But even so, I'm going to still conduct myself uh, with favor towards you, even though you have not merited it. You have not done something that is the proper wage for your conduct, but that's just predicated upon my faith in Jesus and the faith that I have in you, that like you're more than I see. What my eyes see is not telling me the full picture of who you are. Um, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, miraculously, without concluding, we ended on a positive and hopeful note. And yeah, tune in next week to hear uh, the conclusion of this conversation between Ivan, the nihilist, and Alyosha, the faithful. We'll see you then.
See ya.